Previously, we unraveled the astonishing transformation of Yahweh from a minor storm deity to the supreme God of Israel. We traced his roots back to Baal Hadad, to the forgotten gods of Canaan, and to the remnants of polytheism still embedded in ancient texts. Layers upon layers of revisions have buried the truth, but we are here to unearth it. Now in episode 4, we push even further. What if monotheism wasn't a divine revelation but a deliberate manipulation of history? What if the gods who once stood alongside Yahweh were erased, their names wiped from records by those who sought to control faith itself? The evidence surrounds us, ancient inscriptions, artifacts, and scriptures that refuse to be silenced. Tonight, we pull back the veil on the greatest deception in religious history. Are you ready to see beyond the illusion? Drop the number 77 in the comments if you are prepared to challenge everything you've been taught. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode as we uncover the hidden truths of the ancient world. Long before the rise of Judean monarchy, Jerusalem was already known by a much older name, one that traces back to a legendary priest-king named Melchizedek. Egyptian records from the 14th century BCE, and possibly as far back as the 19th century BCE, confirm the city's existence long before it was claimed by Israelite rulers. Its name, widely accepted to mean foundation of Shalom, was dedicated to a twilight deity. Shalom, the concept of peace, is subtly woven throughout the Bible, yet it conceals an origin deeply tied to ancient god worship. Shalom's brother, Shahar, appears only once in the Bible, in a passage that seems to borrow heavily from a much older, more intricate myth. Isaiah 14, verse 3-23, contains a prophecy condemning the king of a rival nation. His arrogance and cruelty warrant a severe rebuke, and the prophet declares that he will suffer an unceremonious and disgraceful death. To illustrate the king's fall, the passage compares him to a rebellious celestial being. Many English translations dilute the mythological allusions within this passage. Centuries of Christian reinterpretation have blurred its original meaning. Yet, when restored to its proper context, the message is clear. How you have fallen from heaven, Hillel, son of Shahar. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of El. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, I will make myself like Elion. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the depths of the pit. Here we uncover references to one of the oldest temples dedicated to El, the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon. First, we see the stars of El, a reminder from Deuteronomy 4 that stars were once regarded as divine beings. Then we encounter the Mount of Assembly, a direct parallel to Ugaritic texts describing the divine council of gods. Finally, there is Zaphon, the sacred mountain where the gods were believed to convene, a Canaanite counterpart to Mount Olympus in Greek mythology. The fallen figure named Hillel, son of Shahar, was not originally a demonic entity, nor was he Satan. He was something far older, a celestial being cast down from divine status. Shahar, his father, was himself a son of El, making Hillel a divine heir. This passage does not describe the fall of a devil, but the dethroning of an ancient god, buried beneath centuries of rewritten theology. Who decided which gods would remain and which would be forgotten? Why was monotheism shaped the way it was? What other truths have been hidden beneath layers of religious revision? The answers are out there, waiting to be revealed. The grandson of El, a divine lineage, shrouded in the mists of time. The exact myth that the prophet Isaiah borrowed from is lost to us, hidden beneath layers of history and forgotten truths. Scholars have attempted to trace its origins, linking it to the gods Arar, Phaton, or Halalu. But beneath these names lies something deeper, something celestial. It is clear that Isaiah's inspiration came from the stars themselves. Venus, the brilliant star born of the dawn, dared to rise above the others, refusing to fade into obscurity even in the face of daylight. A rebellious force in the heavens, desperate to claim a throne beyond its destined realm. And yet, just like Icarus, whose hubris led him too close to the sun, this lesser god was doomed to fall. Isaiah 14 speaks in veiled words, assuming his audience already understands the polytheistic myth that lurks beneath his rebuke of a mortal king. one who, in his arrogance, sought to ascend beyond the limits of man. A delusion, a challenge to the divine order, a crime that demanded judgment. But in time, the message of Isaiah 14 took on a life of its own. In Greek translations, the name Hallelu was rendered as Heosphoros, the bringer of dawn. In Latin, it became Lucifer. And from this single mistranslation, an entire doctrine was born. Christianity, in its evolving interpretations, took the condemned king at the heart of Isaiah's prophecy and wove him into a new legend, one of a fallen angel, an adversary cast from heaven, the very embodiment of darkness. Satan. The misunderstanding did not stop there. It seeped into Ezekiel 28, where another tale of divine rebellion was written in the condemnation of a king, adorned in mythological language. And yet, elsewhere in the scriptures, the ancient echoes of forgotten gods still whisper. Isaiah himself makes brief but haunting references to another deity, one feared even in the highest realms of El. In Ugaritic texts, he is known as Habi, a dark god, a demon from the underworld, one whose very presence could strike terror into the divine court. Even El himself shuddered before him. Isaiah 26:20 alludes to practices meant to instill fear. Perhaps a warning, perhaps a memory of a force far older than the monotheistic faith that would come to dominate history. But the traces of polytheism, of forgotten gods and veiled myths, did not fade so easily. They lingered in the stories, in the symbols, hiding in plain sight. Take, for instance, the story of Samson, a tale told and retold, a favorite of Sunday school lessons, yet stripped of the deeper truths it once held. In the book of Judges, Samson is cast as one of the great heroes of Israel, a defender of his people in the lawless days before kings ruled the land. But his story is different. It does not fit neatly into history. It echoes something much older, something mythological. His feats of strength are legendary, his battles larger than life. Scholars have drawn comparisons between Samson and the demigods of other cultures. Gilgamesh, Heracles, divine beings who walk the earth, their power unmatched by mere mortals. And like all legends, Samson's origins are steeped in mystery. His birth is heralded by a heavenly visitor, a messenger cloaked in divine radiance. But some have argued that this story bears the mark of revision, that it may have once told a different tale, one in which the heavenly visitor was not merely a messenger, but Samson's true father. The location of his tale is no coincidence. It unfolds near the town of Beth Shemesh, a name that translates to House of Shamash. Shamash, the Canaanite sun god, and Samson's very name in Hebrew, Shimshon, echoes this same celestial deity. It means little son or young son, a divine title hidden within the story itself. His strength was bound to his long hair, an unbreakable connection to his power. But why? In the ancient world, the sun was often depicted with radiant strands of light, like flowing golden hair stretching across the heavens. Was Samson not merely a man, but a reflection of the sun itself? And then there is Delilah, the woman who would bring about his downfall. Her name, too, is not without meaning. It comes from Lila, the word for night, a battle between the sun and the night, between radiance and darkness. The tale of Samson is not just a simple story of strength and betrayal. It is a cosmic drama, a battle of celestial forces disguised as a fable of men. And yet, over time, its deeper meaning was lost, buried beneath the sands of history, reshaped into something more palatable for later generations. His hair, his divine essence. The little sun was defeated when the night extinguished his radiance. The shadows of forgotten gods still linger within the pages of Scripture, their presence often overlooked, their significance buried beneath layers of translation and time. Some of these deities were not just worshipped but were protectors, guardians of sacred places, watchers over kings, unseen forces woven into the very fabric of ancient belief. The prophet Isaiah, who lived in the 8th century BC, spoke of six-winged serpents, divine entities that stood as servants of Yahweh's throne within his temple. Winged and serpentine, these celestial beings were no mere decorations. They were sacred, powerful, and deeply rooted in the traditions that predated monotheism. The seal of a Judean king, Hezekiah, a contemporary of Isaiah, depicts a four-winged serpent, reinforcing this imagery. Were these beings remnants of an older Egyptian influence seeping into Canaanite culture? Or were they part of a greater truth, a truth later obscured? As the Babylonian Empire crushed Judea, as its people were scattered, as their sacred texts were rewritten and restructured, these divine figures took on new forms. No longer serpents, they became something else: cherubim, guardians of Yahweh's throne, protectors of the temple. But these were no chubby-faced angels of Renaissance paintings. No, these beings had the faces of men, the bodies of lions or bulls, the wings of eagles. They were terrifying, powerful, otherworldly. Their origins? Ancient. The Mesopotamians knew them as Lamassu, colossal protectors carved into temple walls, standing watch over the gates of cities. Their presence in the Bible is no accident. They were inherited, rebranded, but never truly erased. And then there were the messengers. The Hebrew and Greek words for angel both translate simply to messenger, divine couriers running errands for Yahweh, carrying out his will. But in the eyes of ancient believers, these were not just spirits. They were minor gods, part of a celestial hierarchy that predated Israelite monotheism. Why? Because in the mythologies of old, the universe was never simply created from nothing. It existed as chaos, formless, wild, untamed. The first gods did not conjure the world into existence. They carved order from disorder. They stretched the sky, shaped the land, and set the boundaries of the oceans. The Hebrew Bible echoes these beliefs, whispering remnants of a past that still see. Praise Yahweh with all my heart. Yahweh my God, you are great. You are clothed with glory and majesty, wrapped in light like a garment. You stretched out the heavens like a tent. You placed the beams of your chamber over the waters. You set the earth on its foundation so that it would never be shaken. But the waters were there first. The chaos existed before order. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters rose higher than the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At your thunder they flew away. They rose above the mountains, ran down into the valleys, to the place you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they should not cross, so that they would never again cover the earth. The waters, chaos personified. In ancient Canaanite belief, this force was embodied by a god, Lotan, a monstrous servant of the ocean deity Yam and the river god, Nahar. These names, sea and river, were not merely symbols. They were deities, primordial and untamed. The struggle for control of the universe was not an act of peaceful creation, it was war. One of the oldest surviving Canaanite epics tells how, in the early days of existence, El, the great father of the gods, granted rule to Baal, but not without conflict. Baal had to prove himself, had to fight for his throne. His enemy was Yam, the raging sea, and their battle determined the fate of the heavens. I say to you, O Prince Baal, I declare, O rider of the clouds, now your enemy, O Baal, now you will strike your enemy. Strike Prince Yam in the head, between the eyes of Judge Nahar. Yam will collapse and fall to the ground. This is the imagery that shaped the beliefs of the ancient world. Battles between deities, the clash of primordial forces, the struggle for dominance over chaos. Even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Baal-Hadad appears, rising with the first light of dawn. A black cloud spreads across the horizon, thunder within its core, bolts of lightning striking as his war chariot moves forward. He is accompanied by other gods, divine warriors standing at his side. And these minor gods, they too make appearances in the Bible, though subtly, their identities masked by time. Resheph, the god of plague. Deber, the bringer of pestilence. Forces of destruction lurking beneath poetic verses. Man is born to trouble, like the sons of Resheph flying upward. Job 5 verse 7. You shall not fear the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor Deber that walks in darkness, nor Keteb that ravages at noon. Psalm 91. Like a storm, the weapons of the god of war shake the heavens and the earth. Thunder roars as divine arrows pierce the sky. Bolts of lightning, sometimes made of fire, striking down with unstoppable force. These are the weapons of the gods. And they are the same weapons wielded by Yahweh himself. The Bible echoes this cosmic power in Psalm 18. Yahweh thundered in the sky, the Most High spoke. He shot arrows and scattered them. He flashed lightning and routed them. But this imagery is not unique to Yahweh. It is ancient, far older than the Bible itself. The Canaanite storm god Baal was worshipped for centuries before the first Israelite texts were ever written. His dominion over thunder, lightning, and war was unquestioned. So why does Yahweh bear the same attributes? The answer is as unsettling as it is revealing. When Yahweh's worship spread from Midian or Edom into Canaan, his followers encountered a land where Baal was already revered. And so they adapted. They took Baal's power, his stories, his victories, and reshaped them for their own god. Isaiah 27 even repeats these mythological themes almost word for word. Yahweh did not merely challenge Baal, he absorbed him. This theory also explains the deep rivalry between the two faiths. The Bible is filled with violent clashes between Yahweh's prophets and Baal's followers. These battles were more than just religious conflicts. They were struggles over identity, over divine power, over who would rule the heavens. And with this context in mind, we turn to one of the Bible's most cryptic passages, Habakkuk 3. This poem, buried within the Old Testament, has long puzzled scholars. Surviving Hebrew and Greek copies are riddled with errors. Letters swapped, meanings obscured, words so rare that their true translations remain debated. But when these fragments are pieced together, when the missing details are restored, the picture becomes clear. It is a war story unlike any other. In Habakkuk 3, Yahweh is not the distant, formless deity of later scripture. He is a storm god, emerging from his holy mountain in Edom, marching to battle as his followers tremble in fear. He does not fight alone. At his side march other gods, divine beings long forgotten, stripped from later biblical traditions. The gods of sickness and the underworld go before him. Deber and Resheph, known in Canaanite lore as bringers of plague and destruction, follow close behind. The people of Cushan and Midian cower as Yahweh's divine army passes. But who is his enemy? Who dares to stand against the Lord of storms? The answer is shocking: Yam. The same Yam, the primordial sea god, the great adversary of Baal in Canaanite mythology. Habakkuk 3 asks the question directly: Is your wrath against Yam, O Yahweh? Is your anger against Nahar? Is your fury against the sea? Yahweh's battle is not against mortals, but against chaos itself. The raging ocean that once ruled before the gods imposed order upon the universe. His bow is drawn, his arrows poisoned. Lightning flashes from his hands like spears of fire. Thunderclouds blacken the sky as the battle begins. The sun and moon, represented by the gods Shamash and Yar, pause to watch. The heavens hold their breath as Yahweh prepares to strike. This passage is unlike anything else in the Bible. It is raw, it is mythological, and it is a relic of an era when Yahweh was not yet the singular God of Israel, but a warrior, a stormbringer, a divine force among other gods. The forgotten truth: Yahweh's rise to absolute power, and the gods that came before Deber, Resheph, Shamash, Yar. These names are as real as Yahweh himself. The undeniable presence of Canaanite gods, clustered together in biblical texts, is not an accident. The author of these passages knew their power, acknowledged their existence, and had no reason to doubt it. But history has been rewritten, truth has been reshaped, and the gods who once stood alongside Yahweh, erased, demoted, or twisted into something else entirely. Like all religious systems, the Yahweh religion evolved. What started as one god among many became something else, something absolute, untouchable, beyond comprehension. Yahweh, once merely a regional deity, rose above all others, declared the supreme creator of all things, the God above gods. Unlike the divine beings that came before him, Yahweh was rewritten as eternal, without origin, without rival. And with this shift, a new doctrine was born. If Yahweh is the one true God, then what does that make the others? The answer was both simple and radical. They were not gods at all. Not in the way Yahweh was. They were his creations, beings who existed, yes, but only as servants, not equals. The Canaanite gods who once ruled the heavens, their titles stripped away, their names erased, their roles rewritten. They became angels, or worse, demons. The spirits of the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the disembodied dead, deceiving mankind with false visions of divinity. The gods were no longer gods. They were illusions. They were imposters. They were Yahweh's enemies. But irony runs deep in history. As Jewish theologians elevated Yahweh's supremacy, a new problem emerged. If he was so far above everything, so beyond the created world, how could he still interact with it? If Yahweh was the unreachable divine, then who stood between him and humanity? Theologians began to speculate. They envisioned a divine hierarchy, a chain of command between Yahweh and the world. Angels were at the bottom. Above them, guardian spirits and winged serpents. Above them, angelic princes, archangels, rulers of the nations. These angelic beings weren't just symbols. They were real forces of power, commanding the fate of the world. When nations clashed, it was not merely men at war, it was their divine rulers fighting in the heavens. The book of Daniel 10 gives a chilling account of this cosmic battle. The prince of the kingdom of Persia fought against me for 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me. I left him there with the prince of Persia and came to explain what will happen to your people in the last days. But after I have defeated the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece will come. A war beyond human sight. A battlefield where the fates of nations were decided before the first sword was ever drawn. This is not the sanitized monotheism of modern faith. This is a world where the gods of old still fought in the shadows. Their names changed, but their roles unchanged. Even after Yahweh had been elevated to absolute supremacy, the idea of lesser gods ruling over the world refused to die. The ancient Canaanite belief that each nation had its own divine ruler persisted, even within Judaism itself. The 70 nations of the world were each ruled by a divine prince, a god-king beneath Yahweh's throne. But still, the question remained. Was Yahweh truly separate from all creation, or did he need a bridge, a voice, an intermediary? The final answer was shocking. If Yahweh was too distant, then something or someone had to stand on the boundary between the Creator and creation. A being who could represent all of existence before God, yet still embody God's essence in the eyes of creation. The answer? The Word. Yahweh's inner wisdom, his divine logos, brought forth as a living being, his creative power given form. This entity became the ambassador between heaven and earth, the one who stood at the very threshold of the divine and the mortal. And yet, with this revelation, another question arises. Why does Yahweh speak of another God when he says, "Let us make man in the image of God," rather than simply saying, "in my own image"? Who is this us? Who else stands at the moment of creation? Who is the other divine force Yahweh addresses? The answer is hidden, buried in layers of rewritten history, altered texts, and theological shifts. But one thing is certain, the gods of old never truly disappeared. They were renamed, reshaped, rebranded as angels, demons, and divine messengers. And still, some of them stand, their presence undeniable, even in the modern texts. Very fitting, and without any lie, is this oracle of him. Yah still stands in his exalted place. Habakkuk 3. A text written not by a modern monotheist but by an Israelite or Judean who still remembered the gods who came before. A testimony to a time when Yahweh was not alone, when he was still one among many. The hidden truth: was ancient Judaism truly monotheistic, spoken by God himself? Because no mortal thing can ever be shaped in the likeness of the Supreme Father of the universe. Only the second God, the Word of the Supreme God, can bear his image. This was the teaching of Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher who saw the universe in layers of divine authority. But what he described was not a simple monotheistic faith. It was something far more complex. The insistence that Yahweh is completely unlike anything he created led these ancient thinkers back toward polytheism in disguise. Their pantheon included, at least, the supreme creator God, a second God, acting as the divine representative archangels, ruling over the kingdoms of the world, a host of angels, each presiding over different forces of the physical universe. This is not the rigid monotheism often portrayed in modern discussions of ancient Judaism. In fact, such beliefs survived well into the 1st century AD and beyond. The idea that ancient Judaism was a unified, strictly monotheistic faith is simply not true. Competing beliefs existed. Some saw Yahweh as supreme, standing alone. Others believed in divine hierarchies, where Yahweh worked through intermediaries, angels, archangels, even a second God. So the real question is, should we even be using the terms monotheism or polytheism when talking about ancient Judaism? If there was a supreme God but also a second God, ruling spirits and celestial authorities, then what was it? A hidden polytheism? A monotheism with multiple divine figures? A belief system that defies modern categories? The hidden truth, the rise of Yahweh and the forgotten gods of Israel. The gods of the ancient world were many. They ruled over the heavens, the earth, and the seas. They commanded storms, brought fertility, and guided the destinies of nations. And yet, in the biblical account, only one would remain. The Bible tells the story of a covenant, a promise made between Yahweh and his chosen people. When the Creator, often called Yahweh or Elohim, led the Israelites out of Egypt, he demanded total devotion. In return, he promised them a land of their own. But there was a condition: they must worship only him. The world was filled with polytheists, but Israel had to be different. Yahweh led them into Canaan, where they waged war against the native peoples, nearly wiping them out and establishing their own kingdom. But victory was short-lived. Soon after, their unity crumbled. A civil war split them into two rival kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And then the old gods returned. Over the centuries, Israel and Judah repeatedly fell into the worship of other deities. The gods of their Canaanite neighbors tempted them. Baal, Asherah, El-Resheph. These were not foreign gods to the Israelites. These were gods they had once worshipped themselves. Yahweh's anger was relentless. His people had broken the covenant. His punishment was swift. First, the kingdom of Israel was conquered and destroyed. Then, Judah suffered the same fate. The survivors were scattered, their temple burned, their kingdom lost. Exile was their final punishment for betraying their God. But something changed during their time in exile. This time they were determined to uphold their promise to Yahweh. The old gods had to be erased, but history leaves traces. And in the early 20th century, archaeologists uncovered a treasure trove of ancient texts, the ruins of Ugarit, an ancient Canaanite city in modern-day Syria. The Ugaritic texts, written between 1400 and 1200 BC, contained stories of gods older than the Bible itself. And what they revealed was devastating. These texts were written in a language nearly identical to Biblical Hebrew, yet they predate the Bible by hundreds of years. The names found in Ugaritic texts, El, Baal, Yam, Mot, Asherah, were not just familiar. They were the very gods of the Israelites. The Israelites were Canaanites. They did not come from Egypt. They were not outsiders who had fallen into polytheism. They were polytheists from the very beginning. The Exodus story, central to the Bible's narrative, has no historical evidence. Most scholars agree that it never happened. Instead, the Israelites and Judeans were simply two subcultures that emerged within Canaanite society. They were never monotheists. They became monotheists only after centuries of erasing their past. And Yahweh? His origins remain a mystery, but evidence suggests that he was not native to Canaan. Ugaritic texts do not mention Yahweh. The best clues we have suggest that Yahweh worship came from the south, possibly from Midian or Edom. At some point, Yahweh was merged with El, the supreme god of the Canaanite pantheon. Over time, the other gods were erased. Baal, Yam, Asherah, and the rest were either demonized, turned into metaphors, or absorbed into Yahweh's identity. And just like that, monotheism was born. But was it ever truly monotheism? Even after Yahweh had become supreme, traces of the old belief system remained. The Bible still mentions divine councils, angelic rulers, and Yahweh speaking as if there were other gods present. The transition from polytheism to monotheism was messy, filled with contradictions and buried truths. But one thing is certain: the gods of Israel did not disappear. They were rewritten, rebranded, hidden beneath layers of doctrine and interpretation. The hidden truth: was Yahweh just one of many gods? For centuries, the true origins of Yahweh have been buried beneath layers of edited scripture, rewritten history, and religious evolution. But when we peel back those layers, when we look at the earliest versions of the biblical texts, a shocking truth emerges. Yahweh was not always the supreme deity. He was not always the one true God. In the beginning, he was one God among many. The suppression of the old gods. The Canaanite god Baal-Hadad was once believed to be a follower of Yahweh, a divine warrior beneath his command. But over the next few centuries, the attributes of Baal and other gods were absorbed into Yahweh's identity. He became the sole ruler, a god of war, storms, and judgment, while the others were erased from history. This process was not accidental. It was deliberate. The worship of any deity other than Yahweh was systematically suppressed. Cultural and religious leaders ensured that references to rival gods were either removed from scripture or rewritten to fit a monotheistic narrative. The Bible was altered, and the old gods were reduced to nothing more than demons, false idols, or forgotten names. Yet, despite these efforts, traces of Israel's polytheistic roots remain. El, the father of the gods. In Ugaritic texts which predate the Bible by centuries, the supreme deity was not Yahweh. It was El. The name El literally means God, and he sat at the highest position of the Canaanite pantheon. He was called El Elyon, God Most High, and Shaddai, the Almighty. His wife, the goddess Asherah, was a major figure in early Israelite religion before being erased from biblical tradition. Together, El and Asherah were said to have 70 divine sons, each ruling over a different nation. If this video has challenged what you thought you knew, drop 777 in the comments, T-ups and smile. And this is only the beginning. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us in the next episode, uncovering the suppressed history hidden within the very foundations of faith.